Good afternoon, welcome to this review of The Compleat Werewolf by Anthony Boucher. My initial instinct was to pronounce that Boucher, but an online article suggests that he did actually pronounce his name Boucher to rhyme with voucher, and who am I to argue with a person's pronunciation of their own name? Now, I hadn't heard of this author when I picked up this book, and I feel like this book is one I picked up fairly recently, I think this year. It was in a haul or a small mini haul, and I don't remember much about it except that I picked this up and bought it sight unseen. I have been trying to aim to read more short stories in 2025 since, while I don't love the short story reading experience, so many of the early science fiction and fantasy and horror stories are found in short story compilations, so I thought I'd give it a try. This particular compilation has taken me a couple of weeks to finish. They're not fast reads, but I did enjoy them. I read them in between other things that I was reading. I read them in between work and so forth. Now, this Sphere edition came out in 1971, I believe, as the first Sphere edition. This compilation of short stories came out in 1969. Sphere doesn't give any sort of indication who the cover art was done by, but with a little bit of searching around, I think there's even odds that it was done by an English author called Bill Botton. I can't be certain, and if you know, please let me know, but the style of art seems fairly similar to some of his other work. He did a fair amount of work for Sphere in around about the late 90s, early 70s, and I just think it could well be his. Anyhow, so this book consists of 10 stories. It's got a couple of peculiarities. One peculiarity is that there's no actual list of the stories within. Now, the titular story, The Compleat Werewolf, had actually appeared previously, I'm pretty certain. I'm not certain I can remember or find again where. Appeared in quirks reviews. That doesn't help. It was nominated for an award, which I don't believe it received. I can't find the details. But hunting around Anthony Boucher's list, it seems like he had a list of several stories all using the same character, Fergus O'Brien, which I didn't notice. I don't think there's any sort of particular order. I don't think that you can't read them out of order. I certainly did. I read them in the order in here. There are 10 stories. Now, as well as not having any list of what those stories are, you've got a couple of quirks. So each story starts like this, in the middle of the page, saving as much space after the last story finished as they could. The other thing that you see in similar font is headlines of newspaper articles and so forth, like so. So sometimes it's a bit hard to tell what story is what and where they're coming from. But to the best of my understanding and memory, you do have 10 stories in here, and I wrote notes while I was reading them. The first, The Compleat Werewolf, titular story. And can I just say how much I love that spelling? It's cute. It's part of what sucked me in. It's a weird sort of a story, and it was apparently first published in 1942, and it feels it. It feels old. All of the writing in this novel feels older, and some of it has dated a fair bit, but despite feeling old, it's good in its own way. I'm going to read a fair bit of what other people have said about it first. So Quirks Reviews called it a giddy burlesque. Don't know about the burlesque, but I'll go with the giddy. A SF site listed it among Boucher's best stories. Stableford, an author I approve of, described it as an example of preliminary dehistorization followed by a reaccommodation to American pragmatism, and I've got to assume that he was taking the piss, because that's so many words that may not mean anything. In any case, what happens in it is you've got this a professor of German goes off the rails in his office after having received a letter of refusal to marry him from an ex-student. One gathers that he was a naughty professor and gave this particular student some preferment because she was pretty, etc., etc., but now she's ignoring him. So he winds up drinking in a bar and telling his miseries to the bartender, which is a time-honoured plot builder. When the bartender is sick of that, he asks some other guy to stand in from him, and a strange man who's sitting at the bar comes and listens to the story of all Wolf's woes. I kid you not. His first name is Wolf with an E, his second name is Wolf without an E, and he's a German professor. One feels that there's some indications that could be there. There's some other physical indications that are mentioned in passing. Now, this particular person is an actual real-life magician, not a children's party musician, but an actual guy who does magic. And right by now, besides the giddy burlesque, you'll have realised this is a humorous story. Humour in science fiction isn't always my favourite thing, but here I didn't think it was that bad. The egocentric element of Wolf himself is humorous, the character is humorous, the situation is humorous. The idea of this magician sitting at a bar in order to inform Wolf that despite his belief of his lifetime, he is not a normal human, but he's an actual werewolf, that is also done humorously. Now, after he's had enough to drink, he gets this stranger to drink a few too many, and the stranger decides to teach him the word he must pronounce in order to transform to a wolf, and the word he must pronounce in order to transform back into a human. Having been convinced that this is true and not just nonsense, Wolf's first thought is that he can use this brand new skill to impress the object of his desire, who's now an actress, on how not routine and boring he is. The second thought that he has is, oh shite, I can't say the N word, because as a wolf, he doesn't have the vocal cords to pronounce the word. So the magician comes to the rescue and pronounces the N word. He comes back into human. There's a lot of back and forth, and we do get a bit of a good view of a world which is stranger than Wolf had ever imagined. The plot is very fast-paced. Events happen. It becomes a bit of a thriller. It becomes a bit of a mystery thriller, shoot-'em-up, combined with war criminals. I don't know how he got all that together, and I don't know how he made it work. I don't know how he made it work for me, because the humour element would normally be way too much for me, like too much sugar in a drink, but no, I actually quite liked it. So I would give that 4 out of 5 stars, despite, or maybe because of the satire, humour, slapstick that was actually done very well. The only thing that leaves me wondering about that one is the magician, whose disappearance from the story is quite magnificent, keeps mentioning the Darjeeling episode. I wanted to know what the Darjeeling episode was. If there's another Boucher story out there that tells me about the Darjeeling episode, let me know and I will actually look out for it. Story number 2 is called The Pink Caterpillar, and in it we start out with a group of blokes sitting around having a chat over, I seem to believe, a beer. Bloke number 1 is an army guy, Norm Harker maybe, and he's just back from a secret service naval posting somewhere in the South Pacific, somewhere so secret he can't tell his drinking buddies where it is. However, he is replete with stories about the supernatural and magical on this South Seas island. And from what he says about it, I rather gather the impression that Anthony Boucher had never been to any South Seas island. However, I could be wrong about that. One gathers that this is probably during World War II. The first one definitely had a World War II element because it had Nazi spies in it. This one, World War II-ish type element. And after our protagonist has told this story of magical events on the Pacific island, One of the other blokes starts talking, and in this story, which I will give 3 stars on principle, I actually lost track of who was who and where. There were some blokes talking, but I never got all of them. I started writing down their names, and I still couldn't quite get who was who. Fergus O'Brien, whatever, is one of them. And he has also had a touch of magic. I believe it's Fergus who's telling the next part of the story. At one stage, he was an investigator for an insurance agency. Some guy had died in a remote village in South America. His sister was due to inherit, but there was some small question about the autopsy, being as how he's described in the autopsy as a doctor, whatever, and in real life he wasn't a doctor. So off hies our protagonist to this tiny North American town, not even town, village, where all the villagers are convinced that he's a doctor because he's got lots of books, which turn out to be English literature, and a whole skeleton on a stand in the corner of his study. It turns out that this skeleton has got nothing to do with medicine and a whole lot to do with the supernatural. And while the title, The Pink Caterpillar, does not seem to superficially suggest either the supernatural or a skeleton, it is linked in. And this was a good story which I quite enjoyed once we got into it. Once we got past the group of blokes having a beer around a table or whatever was happening there. Story number 3 is titled QUR, for reasons that I honestly don't remember. They may have been exposed in the book or they may not. I'm really not certain about that at all. But it starts when our narrator, who is talking to us in a matey sort of way, telling us that we're probably too young to remember when robots looked like humans because they don't anymore, but he knows why, and he's about to tell us that story. Now, the story is that when the events open, he is a robot repair man for a big company, Robots Incorporated, and all the robots or androids are made in the form of humans, and many of them are breaking down in mysterious epidemic type level ways. On the way to or from repairing one robot or other, he stumbles across a street fight, and while he's going to, in a cowardly but sensible, I will say, way, wander away from it, this young guy plows in, fists flying, because it's a case of a whole heap of humans bullying an extraterrestrial. Now, somewhere in the wake of all this, we learn a little bit about this future Earth as foreseen. It's full of robots. They do all the menial tasks. Menial tasks aren't done by humans anymore. Humanity has colonized at least the solar system. We have a presence on Mars and we have a presence on Venus, both of which had native inhabitants when we arrived, who are mentioned in more than passing. So it is superficially mildly humorous story. The incidences of alien baiting against the Venusians, who have tentacles and a kind of like a land walking octopus maybe, versus the Martians. There's some meaty concepts in there, but they're fairly heavily hidden, shall we say. The humorous element is that the guy who goes wading in to save the hapless Venusian actually ends up being this guy's partner, because he's got a very clear-sighted way of seeing problems and how to fix them, which doesn't always occur to other people. Now, he sees the problem with robots being they're being designed to not to look like humans, rather than to look like the best form to complete the tasks at hand. So he invents the notion of the user form, the robotic thing that has been developed to do just the task it's meant to do. So a chef, for example, needs more than 2 hands. So a chef robot, if it's their user form, has many hands. If it's an android shaped like a human who's trying to be a shape, it goes into breakdown because it isn't designed properly for its task, etc., etc. It's a pretty great concept and I really enjoyed it. Essentially, it turns into a still humorous debate on human expectations desires and how hard it is to overcome Robots Incorporated, which has got complete political and market corner on making robots. Essentially, no one else can. So how they get about that is very human. And throughout this book, Boucher has humanity and it as its core of most of his stories in a way that I actually quite enjoy. There's a couple of other meaty things about this story, which is too long. I'm going to say no one in this day and age would publish a story this long and this repetitive. It didn't need to be anywhere near as long as it was. And I can't check the page count for you because there's no menu, but yeah, there was too much of it. It took me a long time to read. I kept having to put it down because a lot of it was dull. The story was great, the concept behind it. The writing is very, very nice, but at times it is quite dull. So I like the fact that the head of council, which is basically the head of Earth, is black. And we go through that a few pages before our wonder kid kind boy who sees everything straightly says if you go back a few generations, centuries, whatever, the fact that he was black would be remarkable, but now it isn't. And in the same way, we can get humanity to accept robots that look like they're what they're trying to do instead of like other people. So there's a lot of, the concept is really good and the ending is pretty good as well. But it's odd because that leads us into our next story, story number 4, which is called Robbing, which is abbreviation of Robots Incorporated. So essentially going on to story 4 feels like a continuous story 3, only from a slightly different angle because it's about the company that's mentioned in an adversarial fashion in story number 3. Confused yet? Well, I was too, so that's okay. So they're making robots in the image of men, and it's about viewing people and how people view the user forms. And this one, if the previous story was a bit dull, this was sleep-worthy. It was really, really dull, repetitive, and I didn't enjoy reading it very much at all. I did read it. I read every bit of it, but it took me many times. I sometimes could only manage a page or two at a time before I had to go and do something more interesting, like, I don't know, the laundry, cleaning the birdcage, anything rather than read it. So I imagine it was a far more interesting concept when it was first conceived and when it was first written, but in 2025 it leaves something to be desired. The ending, however, is really good, and I shan't mention it, because you can't really enjoy that ending without having sat through all the dullness that led up to it. Story number 5 is called Snull. Again, or still, very humorous, very quirky. In it, a desperate biochemist summons a demon in order to get the lab of his dreams and enough money to complete his research, which will be for the benefit of all mankind, only he can't get his research supervisor to be interested and he can't get funding. So he gets the demon, but being a biochemist by nature rather than a magician, he's mashed it up from books, and in the result, instead of a huge, big, scary demon, he has a tiny little geriatric demon called Snull. Now this demon can move things around, but not very much, and he can't achieve a lot, and he whines a lot. He sounds a bit ethnic, won't go any further in his whining attitude. Eventually, our protagonist Bill figures out that what he can do is he can send Snullbug into the future to acquire a newspaper, which he will transport back to the now, and he will use the contents of the newspaper to get rich. Now, timey-wimey stuff, as Doctor Who said once, long ago. Perhaps it's just me, and I'm just a tiny bit bored with timey-wimey stuff. But you could see that this was one of those bargains that are going to go wrong. So we get a newspaper back, and first of all he tries to win money. It would be the lottery nowadays, by betting on horses, and that doesn't work for reasons of timey-wimey contradiction in terms. And then he tries to do something else and it doesn't work. He tries to save the mayor from assassination by earning his everlasting gratitude, and that doesn't work. All the timey-wimeys, yeah? At the end, he finally hits on a way to make money out of this newspaper by selling it to someone who's fascinated by the occult, and that goes wrong as well. The interesting thing about this story, and many other stories in this book, is that the end is a twist, and the twist is unexpected, and it totally redeems the story. So Bill does actually get the money that he needs for possibly his research, or at least some money. And it is well written. This one was quite short. I was not unhappy about it. I probably would give Snullbug 3 stars out of 5. I'm being a bit generous there, but it was okay. Story number 6 is called Mr. Lupescu, and that again has a twister. They're all a bit of a twister. We start off with some guy visiting a friend of his who's now married, and she's got her husband who isn't there at the time, and her little boy who comes through to go and play in the yard with Mr. Lupescu, who is his imaginary friend. Our protagonist laughs and says, "I'll come with you and meet Mr. Lupescu," and he's told that no, Mr. Lupescu doesn't like people and never meets any people and doesn't come inside. So it's all this little small boy's fantasy. We, of course, suspect there's more to it, and we suspect there's a supernaturally thing. And indeed, the boy is playing with his Mr. Lupescu friend, who's got red eyes and wings that he can twitch up and down, a whole heap of other stuff, when Mr. Lupescu goes inside and shoots his father. The boy's father, that is, not his own father. You got it. And then we find that the supernatural actually has a banal explanation, and Mr. Lupescu isn't what he assumed, and so that's the twist to the story, and it's really satisfying. Only then comes the other twist to the story, and maybe there is a supernatural element to it after all. And I'm not going to tell you about it because it's a lot of fun to read. It's a short story and it was good. I'd give that one 4 out of 5 stars. Now, number 7 is They Bite. And that one I really loved. That was my 5 out of 5 star story for this book, because I don't think I mentioned, but when I first picked this book up, I thought I was heading a little bit towards the horror genre. I used to be a big reader of horror. Quite a few, you can't tell from my reviews in the last couple of years, but it used to be one of my primary types of reading, and I kind of went off it and went back to science fiction. But I thought maybe this would be my gateway back to a bit more horror reading, and instead it's mostly comic and humorous. And I should know better, because one of my favourite Simek stories is the werewolf principle, and so many people get disappointed by that, thinking it's going to be a werewolf rending and tearing under the full moon. And yet I can still pick up this and make that assumption. Anyhow, They Bite. This one had a real horror mythological vibe. And it's set in the Rocky Mountains. I didn't know the Rocky Mountains are a desert. Are they a desert? Is this a future scenario? I don't know. It's a desert type scenario, and some guys, they're living there in the Rockies, and he's bought a piece of land, and he's building a cabin on it. And one night in the bar, there's more to it that I'm not going to get into. And one night in the bar, he's chatting, and people start talking about his place, which is the old Karka place, and the Karkas and what they were when they lived there. And you've got this urban mythology, desert supernatural element, and it's a slow creeper of a horror with an excellent ending. I really loved They Bite. And I think anyone who enjoys that slightly horror, slightly weird, slightly supernatural element will enjoy this story. It was one of the most consistently written. I think a lot of modern stories are written to be tight and keep going and keep the narrative rolling, whereas a lot of Boucher's wanders the highways and the byways before remembering that there's a story to be told. But They Bite was a very well held together story. After that, number 8, we've got Expedition, and this one is a fully SF story. It is structured in terms of communications between the away team and home base. The messages from the away team very shortly make it obvious that they hail from Mars, and they're investigating the 3rd planet in the system, starting with its satellite. There's a lot of back and forth, and it's got a twist ending based on the fact that we as humans see ourselves from the inside, and we know what we are, and we know what size we are compared to the universe. But this is being told from the Martian perspective, and the Martians know who they are on the inside and what size they are compared to the universe, but they haven't really tallied that up in the head to make it fit in with humanity. It's not quite the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy moment when the fleet of terrifying dreadnought battleships is swallowed by a small dog, but it's in that direction, and it's a lot of fun. It's well written. Again, pretty consistently written. 4 out of 5 stars. Number 9 is We Print the Truth. It's a tiny American town, and once again, we start with a whole group of blokes sitting around for a poker evening, only without poker and with beers. So there's, I think, 4 guys to begin with. One is the editor of the local newspaper, which comes out twice a week because it's such a small American town. One is the chief of police. The other one is the coroner and the mortuary director. And there's another one. I don't know. There's a few of them. Anyway, they're sitting around talking their normal talk that mates do in that sort of circumstances. And then things get a bit complicated. Someone bursts in to say there's been a murder. The newspaper's going to bring out a special to cover this incredible detail because murders just don't happen in this small town. Now, our newspaper editor, John McVeigh, is about to head off and cover it when his secretary says, no, let me cover it because it's happened at the house of the uncle of the girl he's interested in, and it gets complicated. In We Print the Truth, we once again have that trope that Boucher used in The Compleat Werewolf as well, of the secretary, nondescript girl in love with her boss who wants some glamorous woman, and how that's not going to go well for him. It seems to be about Boucherism, but whatever. Now, John, in the meantime, heads down to tell his print setter that there's going to be a special which he's going to have to work on. The print setter says, no, sorry, boss. I have to move on. I've been here a while. We don't know each other well. But you've been a good boss, so I'm going to give you a wish when I leave. Now, this guy's name is Wayland. And he says, he never even asked my surname, which certainly puts this newspaper in a very different footing to anything we'd see these days. Wayland Smith. Because I like mythology, that meant something to me, though I had to look up the exact details. Wayland Smith is a folklore legend figure. He's not a legendary figure. He's a folklore fairy tale figure. And though it's part of fairy tale mythology as we know it today, I do believe it's older and that it hailed from Old Norse mythology. Anyway, being a fairy per se and as such, he can give his boss one wish. And he does. The wish that John McVeigh is that his newspaper will always print the truth. And that's because as he's trying to figure out this special edition and who's going to print it and everything, in marches the uncle of the girl that he's interested in, who's the most important man in town and runs the factory, and tries to bamboozle him into printing a story about the murder that he wants printed. Whereas John McVeigh's going, no, we're going to print the truth. The newspaper has to tell the truth, etc., etc. All those beautiful myths about the honesty of the news. Actually, more the honesty and integrity and truth of the news is quite possibly more fairy tale than Wayland the Smith. Just gonna say. Anyhow, the whole element of truth and printing is really well done and really enjoyable, and the small town is slightly touched upon, but the notion of the sphere of influence of truth of the newspaper, and this is a deal with the devil type story, because while he phrased his wish very specifically, and Wayland Smith says that's probably the most noble wish I have ever asked and granted, and also the most dangerous one, and it does prove very, very dangerous, as one can imagine if one's printing the truth. I do wonder a little bit if Terry Pratchett ever read this story, and if in any way it contributed to his story set in the Discworld, The Truth, about the newspaper, because while the characters are different, the situations are different, there's I'd guess, an echo of questioning in both of them that I think was fairly reminiscent. Now, I'm not going to tell you exactly how this turns out. It's a really well thought out concept, and it's a pretty well done story. In it, I got the answer to a question from either a previous story or a different book I'm reading from the same era. I can't remember. I was sitting around thinking, what on earth is a G-Man? Unless we're talking about superheroes, I've got no idea what a G-Man is, but the answer is FBI. Apparently, in America, in the 60s and 70s, a G-Man was an FBI. I've got no idea why. If you're American, you might know. If you read in this era a lot, you probably do know. Do please let me know. I can't be bothered Googling it. So this was a great story overall, which I really enjoyed. I loved the concepts behind it. I loved the tangled Gordian knots that John McVeigh gets himself into with the best of intentions. And I love how he slowly rolls downhill or degenerates or grows into the power of owning the truth. It's a great story. Very, very long, and at times it was dull and it was repetitious. Now I'm going to say throughout, The Compleat Werewolf, Anthony Boucher, he can write very well, especially for his era. His writing is of the era, and it's very nice writing. It's very professional. It's exceptionally, I would say, well edited, but to the modern reader it does at times feel dated, of its era, and quite dull. And the truth, that we print the truth, for all that I liked it, had its moments of dullness. That, however, was not my main complaint with We Print the Truth. My main complaint was the punchline. The punchline is clearly meant to mean something, and perhaps in 1969 to 1971 it would have, but I have got no idea what some guy with a Scotty dog is meant to invoke in me. I've got no idea what the punchline was, and I'm a little bit bitter about that. So the last one is, number 10, is called The Ghost of Me, and that is a timey-wimey thing done in the right way. Some guy he's a physician, but he's also a researching physician in this town clinic where he's trialing a brand new medical procedure to cure people who've got cement dust in their lungs. We need him in the now, actually. Anyway, he's doing that, and all of a sudden a ghost appears to him, and he doesn't really believe in ghosts, but this one he has to. It's a ghost of himself, who has actually got the timey-wimey sequence accidentally confused. He was meant to come back into the future after he'd been murdered in order to haunt his murderer, but he's arrived one step or two earlier. He explains it's easy to do. It's like doors in a hall, and you can sometimes open the wrong one and get to the wrong time. He's arrived before he's actually been murdered. So he knows he's been murdered, and there's all this weird stuff that happens. It is doubtlessly quirky, and it's humorous in its own way, but the humor is integral to the story, and I really like that one. I'd probably give that one 4 out of 5 as well. So it wasn't as slow as some of the other ones. It's there was an integrity to the writing that made it feel continuous. So yeah, 4 out of 5 for The Ghost and Me, the last story. Overall, all of these stories were really, really good. Squeak, who's sick of listening to me talk to the camera? Are we sick of hearing me talk to the camera? We are. We are so sick of that. Also, I meant to control the wind and make it go away. Haven't figured out how to yet. So yes, excellent writing, but very slow and very dated. The whole pacing of it is more dated than any actual events or genderization or anything like just the pacing. Great punchlines, great story concepts. Only if you've got this much story, you don't need to write it this much. So great stories, great concepts, often great punchlines. The characterization is a bit average. It's basically a narrator telling you what the story is. Very good for leisurely reading. I do recommend this author, and the stories are very satisfying if you can slow down your reading, which is a challenge for me, and read it slowly, getting into the pace of it and enjoying it. So overall, I would give The Compleat Werewolf probably 4 out of 5 on average. And this well-worn and well-read little book, I'm probably going to read again. Thank you for bearing with me throughout all this. I hope you have a great day. I hope you are reading good books. And if you aren't, maybe pick up The Compleat Werewolf and read this good book.